A torrential downpour has just started. Can you hear it? It's very exciting. It's a beautiful day to stay inside and read. And just what will we be reading, you might ask? Well, today, in my ongoing panic about the Goodreads Choice Awards, because I like to have read enough to make an informed decision, today we're going to be reading 3 2021 thriller releases. These are all ones that have been super hyped. I'm pretty sure they're going to make it into the top 10 of the awards, so I want to get to them. The first book, and the one that I've already started, is The Echo Wife by Gailey. This is a book about clones. Honestly, before going into it, that's all I knew. A thriller of clones, like, I'm sold. I definitely know more now, but I don't really want to tell you more. At least not just yet. Next is The Push by Audrain. This is a story about a mother and her newborn starts acting weird, I think is the premise. I've heard that it is very spooky and not something that you should read if you have small children at home, which I do not. So maybe I will be spared the true terror of this book, but I'm very excited to get into it. I have the audiobook for both of those, so I'm definitely going to be reading them. But then rule of threes, you gotta do it. The third book is going to be The Other Black Girl by Zakiya Dalila Harris. This I heard described as The Devil Wears Prada, but in publishing, and also Get Out. I don't know how all of those things are going to work together, but I'm very intrigued to find out how. I've heard nothing but good things about this one. It's definitely going to be somewhere on the Goodreads Choice, so I want to read it. Alright, so that's the intro. Now, let me tell you about The Echo Wife and my thoughts and feelings. I really like it. I think it is written in a really interesting style. I'm also really enjoying the audiobook because the narrator is more conversational. The narrator just kind of feels like she's over it the whole time. She's just like exhausted, and I'm really enjoying that sort of tone with it. I was a little bit worried that it was going to end up being more sci-fi than thriller, and it is sci-fi. Like, this book wouldn't exist without sci-fi. It's a story about clones, but some thrillery things have happened that I think are really fun, and I'm really enjoying the direction that it's going. Basically, this woman, Evelyn, is a scientist, and she has developed technology for making clones. And one day she finds out that there is a clone out there of her that she did not know about previously. And you can imagine what sort of hijinks ensue. It's got those standard fun morality questions that you would have in a clone book, like, is a clone a person? What is a soul? You know, those kinds of things are fun, but then you also get the thriller hook into it. So far, so good. Another thing I wanted to mention is that Evelyn is doing some backstory stuff about her childhood, and it's weirdly reminding me of, I believe her name was Anna's plotline from The Kind Worth Killing by Peter Swanson. She has that whole backstory where her mom is an artist, and I'm having a hard time remembering exactly what happens, and it's definitely not like a one-to-one parallel, but weirdly I'm getting the same vibe, which I wasn't expecting. So maybe if you liked The Kind Worth Killing, this might be something you enjoy. Maybe it's just me. It's probably just me. So about 36 hours later, maybe less than that, I have finished The Echo Wife. I wasn't meaning to go through this as quickly as I did, but I did. I did the audiobook, which was about 8 hours. I think it's about 250 pages print, so it is relatively short, but still, I flew through it. And there's a lot to really like about this book. I think I'm going to give it 4 stars because I think a lot of the things that I like about it were sort of fill in the blanks. Like, whenever you have a clone story, you're going to automatically sort of think of these things. Questions of, who are you really if there's a clone of you? How do you know which one's the real one? Or like, what constitutes someone as a person? Questions like that, which are really interesting to me, will come up in any clone story that you have. This one did do some interesting things mostly around the protagonist Evelyn's relationship with her parents, and sort of how, even if you have never met your parents, how you sort of take on traits of them. But I do think for such a short book, it did drag a little bit. There were lots of great thrillery moments, but it's hard to say that it's thriller. It's a domestic thriller, but heavier on the domestic than on the thriller. There's also a plot line around having kids, which is just really close to The Push. I know is basically exclusively about kids, so I'm wondering if I should read something else in between this and that. So I'm gonna take a minute to figure out what I want to read next, but I will let you know once I have decided and started it. So last night I started The Other Black Girl. I just read the prologue in the first chapter, I think. But so far so good. I'm really enjoying it. Though I figure I may have screwed up because I was just looking at Goodreads trying to get some more information about it, and basically everyone was saying this isn't a thriller. It's more like a hard-hitting contemporary, and then some thrillery things happen near the end. Which is fine. I'm fine with that. It just sort of defeats the purpose of this video. But if I can have a couple non-conventional thrillers, I will be okay with that. This one is a bit longer, and if it's not a thriller, it'll probably take a little bit more time to get through since it's not quite as page-turny. So I'm going to try to focus on that as much as possible and then squeeze in The Push right at the end, because I have the audiobook and it's like 8.5 hours, and I have now trained myself that like 2 times speed is the minimum that I do, which is wild. I never thought that I would get there. I'd always heard about other people being able to do that, and I thought they were so cool, and now I'm people. That's wild. I am really impressed with this, the writing of it, because it is a debut and it definitely doesn't read like that. It reads like really mature, thoughtful writing. Book update time. I am now 36% of the way through. It's definitely taking me longer to get through than I had hoped for, but it is just sort of slow paced at this time. I do find it sort of recurring through the same scenes a couple times, but I'm still enjoying it. I still think the writing is really good, but it's doing this really interesting thing. Well, it's not. I am. Where I'm realizing sort of the parallels in my feminism infancy are sort of coming up in this book in like a racial way. That probably didn't make any sense. Let me explain. I'm sort of equating this to like when I was first becoming a feminist, I guess, was sort of in the midst of the feminazi wave, where I didn't call myself a feminist because it had like negative connotations and like, what are all these people whining about? And then like now I'm like, oh, this is what they're whining about, important systemic things. And it definitely like takes a while to get there, where I'm noticing in this book, like half the time when the main character talks about issues of race within her workplace, especially, half the time I'm like, yeah, totally agree with you, and then half the time I'm like, what are you whining about? And it's really interesting, like, to catch myself thinking that. It kind of reminds me of the experience reading, what was that book called? Kylie Reid. Such a Fun Age, that's it. That book is very directly about performative white allyship, and so it's a lot more on the nose there, but I definitely caught myself in that sort of identifying with the white character in some of the less than gracious feelings that she has sometimes. And this is definitely like not trying to do that. This book doesn't feel like it's written for white people, whereas I feel like Such a Fun Age, I remembered it, sort of was anticipating this being like a message to white readers. Hopefully I explained that, but I think it's really interesting to like catch myself in these things and think about it on a deeper level. That's the book so far. I will update you when I have something more to say. I always end up reading faster at the back half of the book anyway, so who knows, maybe I'll be done by tomorrow. I was reading before I got interrupted by a very hungry boy, Yeah. Oh, you stink. Anyway, I just wanted to jump on and say I read literally the epigraph of The Push because I was like, you know, maybe I'll read them at the same time, switch it up. And I'm already feeling some things. Yes, I know you're very hungry. Okay, so the epigraph is basically saying when a woman is born, all of her eggs are already inside of her at 4-month-old fetus. And then she said that means that you also lived in your grandmother, because when your mother was a kid, she already had all of her eggs, one of which is you. Me, I guess. And my brain is just trying to wrap my head around that, because like, does that then mean that I was also alive with my great-grandmother? I don't think so, right? But doesn't it mean that you still kind of existed? Does it? I can't. And it's weirding me out, and the fact that like there's no story that's actually happened yet and I'm already having a crisis makes me feel very confident about where this book is gonna go. Isn't that weird? Have you thought about that? Like, I knew that a baby was born with all of its eggs already, but like, did I fully come to grips with what that means? That's messed up. Okay, yeah, I'm gonna not read The Push for a while. I don't know if I'm quite mentally prepared for it. I'll try to get through some more of The Other Black Girl, which I realized I actually haven't told you about. It's about Nella, who is an editor's assistant at a publishing house, and then another black assistant gets hired and sits next to her. And it's interesting. I think it's very similar to sort of like the tensions of the token woman in a corporate setting. Maybe that's simplifying it and like making it about me, but that's what the brain does sometimes. I'm not saying it's good. It's also following this other timeline with Kendra Ray and Diana, who wrote like the big bestseller of the 80s. It's like formative black fiction, and so it's following them as they also worked at the same publishing house in the 80s. Make sense? Everything makes sense. And I guess the inciting incident is Nella's boss asks her to read a manuscript that has some not great black representation in it, and she's not sure how to speak up about it or whether she even should speak up about it. So it's interesting. There's definitely some good stuff in there. I am just still finding it a little slow, which is fine. I am now 80 pages away from the end of The Other Black Girl. A thing has happened, and I don't know how to feel about it, because it's clearly a metaphor, but I don't know for what. And I'm very curious to read reviews that will tell me how to feel about it. In terms of the story, I understand what's happening and why it's being used, but I don't know. It feels like it's going over my head, which I don't mind. Like, that's why Goodreads and booktube exists, for people who are smarter than me to explain things to me. I do like that. I think I said previously, this doesn't feel like a book written for white people. Like, it doesn't care if white people read this. There's lots of references to things that don't get explained, and sometimes you just kind of have to go with it, but I appreciate that. And so I feel like maybe this is another one of those instances, but I'm not sure. Hopefully I will finish it today. Honestly, I really just want to get to The Push. I keep thinking about that epigraph. It's just messing with me now. Things are definitely starting to come together with The Other Black Girl. I don't think I mentioned there's some other perspectives that we get. So Nella is the main character, but we're also getting someone named Shani. We haven't really been sure of what she is doing, how she relates to the story, and now we are getting that. Hey, I'm just hanging out with the cat. Cat, say hi. Cat, there you are. Hi. Yes, he's very sleepy, but he loves me so much, and this is not an abusive relationship. Anyway, I have finished The Other Black Girl, and it's a tough one to talk about. I read some reviews of it, and everyone seems kind of all over the place on it. I saw one that said that it's satire, which I don't entirely agree with, but also I hate satire because like I just don't get it. It just doesn't make sense to me. I can't figure out the tone, and so maybe it is satire and maybe that's what I had a problem with. The ending was good. Like what they did with the ending was good, but I think that it needed to be fleshed out more. I think what happened in like the second last chapter should have happened halfway through the book. We just spent too much of it being confused, and so you sort of second guess yourself the whole time, like, is this person bad or are we okay with them? Is it all in your head or not? It would have been more interesting if we had explored it more. I'm very torn on my rating for it because I did have a good time reading it and I did really enjoy the writing, but I am walking away sort of unsatisfied with it. Sorry, I'm touching my hair so much. It's just not doing what I want. It didn't give us all of the answers that we needed either. There's a whole plot outside of Nella, the whole Shani's plot is happening, and we like know what's happening with it, but we don't really know the scope of it. And like she keeps mentioning Lynn, and I legit have no idea who Lynn is. I sort of understand what Lynn's function is, but like, did we ever meet her? I don't know. It also ended up being slow, and a lot of scenes where like nothing really happened, which I think would have helped if the end point had happened midway, which I think a lot of other people also agreed with. If I gave things half stars, I'd probably give it a 3.5, but I'm going to go with a 3-star for this, just because I think that it won't stick with me long term. I still recommend it. I had a good time. 3 isn't a bad book. It just wasn't quite what I expected going into it, or at every step of the way. The ending is very interesting and still definitely a metaphor for something. It's probably just not like a one-to-one metaphor, which is my problem, but if you've read it and want to explain it to me, please go ahead. Then I started on The Push. I'm not very far into it, and I checked because I was noticing very short chapters, and I think there are 85 of them. It's written in, I don't want to say second person because I don't think it's second person, but it's written like to somebody. So it's this woman, I don't know if she has a name, talking to her ex-husband, I believe, and like chronicling their relationship. But I don't think it's second person because I think second person, you have to be the you in it, you know? Like when I read it, Julia is the you. When you read it, Michelle is the you. Sorry, Michelle, for freaking you out. But because the you has a name, Cooper, I want to say, I don't think that's second person. I think it's just like fake epistolary, right? Maybe it's just me. I don't know anything about literature, but it's good so far. It doesn't have anything spooky happening right off the bat. I also wanted to mention that I started watching 9 Perfect Strangers. It's the adaptation of the Leanne Moriarty book that I didn't read. I read Big Little Lies and watched the first episode of the TV show, and I didn't like the first episode just because it was super boring and I already knew what was happening, sort of. But this one I have no idea what's going on, and I really like it. I think the vibe of it is just excellent, and it's a crazy cast they've got for it. But the problem is they're releasing them weekly, so it doesn't actually finish until like October. So I'm gonna stop watching it because I don't like having to wait that much. That's what we did in the before times. The before times, you know. And I don't know, it feels wrong. And it's just like you can already pick up on the little instances of what will end up being a bigger deal, and you can also, I can definitely tell that it's adapted because it's got 9 people, and like you can sort of tell when in the book it would switch to their POV, which does kind of take me out of it a little bit, and I think maybe would lessen the quality of the TV show if you didn't know it was a book already. Like, it's not a smooth adaptation, but knowing that it's an adaptation, I don't really mind. But yeah, I would definitely recommend it. If you can wait a week between episodes, you are braver than I. I always turn off the camera and then remember like 5 more things that I had to say. So back to the other black girl. It has some interesting change at the end. I don't want to spoil it. Skip ahead 5 seconds for mild spoilers, but it goes less realistic right at the end, which is the thing I know bothers a lot of people and slightly bothered me too, just in how unexplained it is. And I think if it had been introduced earlier, it wouldn't have been such a like shocking blow. That was weird. But I also liked right at the end, like in the epilogue, there's a new character introduced named Dalila, which I thought was really interesting because the author's middle name is Dalila, and I thought that it was an interesting like alter ego, because you kind of get the idea that this is a self-insert, not a self-insert, but like an author insert novel, very much based on her career in publishing. So she is Nella, but then at the end there's this new character named Dalila who I think is also her, and I think it was just an interesting little nod there that I was happy that I caught. I'm sure I had more profound things to say. I'll think of them later, or maybe they're in my Goodreads review. Go check that out. I haven't written it yet, so I'm sure it's brilliant. I'm creeping on the neighbors right now. It looks like they're moving and I'm just nosy. So we are now at the end of this vlog. Did you think that was gonna happen? Obviously not, because I didn't update you on the push at all. But I finished it today. But I really enjoyed this one. It definitely wasn't what I was expecting. I was expecting more like a true horror movie, like an exorcism or something, like this child is actually evil, but a lot of it is just sort of questioning what is up with this child, what's up with the mother's relationship with them. It's all very interesting. Again, another one that leads a lot more domestic than thriller. But I think it was so smartly written. There are interweaving chapters with the main character Blythe, chapters from her mother and her relationship with her mother. So you've got 4 generations of women in here, and seeing how one impacts the other, lots of parallels in there, and they're very brief, which I think was actually really effective, because it also risks getting confusing having all of these women who are similar in a lot of ways, trying to distinguish between them. But the book did a really good job too, because then you also get Blythe's childhood as well. And I do wonder how thrillery this is for a lot of people, because a majority of this book I was like, yeah, it's just how kids are, man. You know, sometimes they suck and there's nothing you can do about that, which is not the point of the book. But I do think it was interesting that like that was my kind of takeaway from it. It's a tough one to talk about because it covers such a broad span of time. I want to say like 15 years from Blythe's perspective, plus the mothers of the past. So that was one thing I wish had been done better, was grounding myself in like where I was now, because Violet would be like 2 one second and then 6 the next, and I was never really clear where we were in the timeline. Not that it super mattered, but I remember just being like, and she's 12. Oh, okay. I think especially the back half is really strong. It takes some really interesting directions, brings in some new characters I really enjoyed. I really think it was more just a women's fiction in a lot of ways, but done with not quite crassness, but brutal honesty. It had things like, you know, when a man writes a thriller and all of the descriptions of women are just like really sexualizing, this did that, but like from a woman's perspective. It was so interesting. Just like when they would talk about their boobs or sex, it comes across really differently in a jarring way. Very graphic depictions of what giving birth is like that are often sort of skipped over. Most things are like, yeah, it sucked, but then the baby and everything's great and I got this out of it. But this is like, hey, I'm in a lot of pain, everything's the worst, why did I do this? Like it sits in that a lot more than other books do, which I think was maybe where the thriller aspect comes in. Is it's just like life is horrifying sometimes. All these mundane things are actually like awful and gross and stick with you long term. Like, it was just very interesting having such graphic language from a woman's perspective that I thought was all really effective. There are other things I want to talk about, but I can't tell you about them because they're spoilers. I'm kind of surprised that, wait, I did this one on audio. Oh, okay. 2 trains of thought. 1 second. So my first train of thought was, I'm surprised this didn't have book club questions, but I finished it via audio. So I'm just checking my Kindle version to see if it has any book club questions, and it doesn't look like it does, which is so interesting to me. Oh, did I just see the author's Canadian? Lives in Toronto. Yeah, great. 1 for Canada. I think this would be a really interesting book to have book club questions on, because I think that's the U-Haul starting up. Goodbye. They're not moving fast enough, so you're just gonna have to bear with me. I think this would be really interesting to have book club questions on, just to get a varied perspective, because all mothers are like the same but different, which I think is really interesting. Like, you could get a really varied perspective from some book club questions. There's also the question of an unreliable narrator. I don't think it's quite that far. I think it's more just like, what is your hormones and what is reality? I think there's some interesting stuff there. I don't think this was an unreliable narrator, but I think that Blythe really grapples with some stuff. But my second train of thought was that this is the same audiobook narrator that did Anxious People, which I also read this month and loved, and especially praised for the audiobook. And so, like, whoever she is, like, maybe she just has a really good agent who's getting her top-notch things to narrate, and I think she really elevated the experience in the push as well. She's just great. Also, going back to the book club question, I think it's a really interesting point to think about whenever something is written in a non-traditional style. So this was written in second person or epistolary, whatever weird combo that is, and I think that that's a very deliberate choice, and it's interesting why the author would do that. And I have some thoughts. Maybe I'll make a spoiler talking video about it, because I just think it's a really interesting one to talk about. So again, even though something I didn't think was super thrillery, maybe it's just domestic thrillers aren't what I'm looking for in a thriller. They more just feel like contemporaries that lean a little darker, I guess. Maybe this is the point that I feel like everyone gets to, where I have to try getting into actual horror. Maybe it's time. So yeah, that was the push. I'm giving it 5 stars. I think it was just a super solidly written book. This is also a debut, and like, you couldn't tell. It was really, really well done. She talks so often about when Blythe is going about her day, about like taking off jackets and it's cold and there's drafts inside, and I kept thinking, like, it's summer, we never have drafts, it's fine. And then finding out that the author lives in Toronto is just like, oh yeah, we do get that, never mind. Winter will come again. That's the push. I think that's all I have to say about it for now. I can see what all of the hype is about, and I'm really excited to read some of the reviews of it. So that's it. We read 3 2021 thriller releases. We had a 3-star, 4-star, and a 5-star, all of which I'm really happy that I read. I think there are some really interesting topics discussed in all of them, and things that you sort of have to sit with and think about, which is what you want out of reading. You want it to expand your horizons and make you a smarter and more empathetic person. So I'm very happy with myself. Hopefully all of these do actually end up in the Goodreads Choice Awards. that's kind of the reason that I read them, but even if they don't, I'm still happy. But like, The Push is definitely going to be in there. That's been marketed hard this year. They're coming up in like 2 months, so I'm probably panicking for nothing, but you can only read so many books in a month, and I want to make sure I read as many as possible, and this was really good at helping me get a jump start on it. Anyway, I'm done rambling. Thank you for watching. If you've read any of these books and want to talk about them with me, please leave your comments below. I would love to chat about these with you, and I will see you in my next one. Bye!